so many people who are joining us. Before we start, a little bit of housekeeping issues. We are going to record this session. So I'm seeking for your permission for us to record. If you have any problem with that, please let us know before we start. This seminar series is titled Addressing the Infusion of Sustainable Development Goals in University Curricula through Problem-Based Learning. And I think that this presentation or this seminar series really come at an important time in South Africa and the world, because this is a topical issue. We all know that academia or universities have a key role to play in advancing and addressing sustainability debates and in general, and in particular, sustainable development goals. And I think that this is quite topical, and obviously there is need to develop models, for example, for enabling universities to mainstream the sustainable development goals into what we do or into curricula. And of course, there's also need to understand the principles and practices of sustainable development in the university curriculum. In addition, I think we also need to understand the challenges, we want to debate the opportunities for training future graduates and the whole university community for engaging in sustainability debates. And also, what are some of the indicators for actually measuring the infusion of sustainability debates? And this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to welcome two panelists, two speakers. I'm going to introduce them to you, and each speaker or presenter is going to have up 25 minutes for presentation, and thereafter we are going to enter into some questions and engagements based on the presentation. So the first speaker today is Coleen Vogel. Coleen is a distinguished professor at the Global Change Institute at Wits in South Africa. She's a climatologist by training and has undertaken research in climate change, climate vulnerability and adaptation, with a particular focus on disaster risk reduction and climate variability. She was one of the key contributors to the writing of the Green and White Papers on South African disaster management and was a major contributing author for the Disaster Management Act. She was one of the chapter lead authors of the Africa chapter for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Fourth Assessment Report, and was also an author of the Synthesis Report for Policymakers. This large team of various scientists, together with Al Gore, received a Nobel Peace Prize. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to welcome Coleen to present to us for about 25 minutes, and then after we move to the next presenter. Over to you, Coleen.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. It's really an honor to share and just give you some sort of humble insights from my working experience and hopefully some ideas that we can chat about further. I'm just going to share my screen and I hope you can see my presentation. I don't know. Stop share. Let me just try again. There's someone who's actually, this is a bit tricky. I'm going to try again. Okay, there we go. Right, can you all see the screen and my slides?
Yes, we
can. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that little glitch in the beginning. Technology is always an issue, and I can't wait to hear from our next speaker about how to improve on technology. So I've entitled my talk, Making Meaning in a Messy World, the SDGs and Moving Knowledge to Action. As you've heard, I'm a climate change scientist working on the intersectionality between biophysical risks and socioeconomic risks. And so I'm very interested in that interface and then how we can train the next generation going forward to actually make contributions in that space. The reason is because we're in an area living in the world here in Southern Africa, which is beset by many of these challenges, in particular, the cyclones which are buffeting our world at the moment, but we're not alone in this. So any part of the world that you look at, whether it's Germany, going to forest fires, to big areas in California, etc., most people are challenged by climate change. But that's not the only thing that I look at. I'm not looking at it only from a biophysical perspective. I'm also interested, here is a picture taken a couple of years ago in 2016, when the city areas around Johannesburg were flooded by a huge flood damage, a flash flood that occurred. And so that also is very interesting and what it did to our infrastructures at the time. The other areas that also matter and the concerns that are really important are the intersectionalities with livelihoods and development issues and challenges. And these are also key to understand in the interface between climate change, climate risk, and development. So it's all about the assets and the capabilities of communities on which many of the risks play themselves out. So this is a set of slides taken from a colleague of mine at the Wits Rural Facility, Wayne Twine, Professor Wayne Twine, whose job he spends much of his time trying to understand the livelihood drivers of how people are making a living out of resources and trying to survive every day. So we've got these combined issues of a biophysical scientific world, if you like, the so-called hard sciences, although I would debate that, and then the softer, again, I would debate sciences, which are more the socioeconomic and the political. And if we move from that rural set of examples at the Wits Rural Facility up near Hoedspruit, we then move into an urban context, and likewise, it's this intersectionality where you have, in this case, it's a set of images taken just outside Johannesburg, and these are a source from a colleague of mine, Tina Fatty, who works at the GCRO at Wits, and here again, you can see those intersectionalities coming together. So flooding occurring, but in an area where you've had governance issues around infrastructural development, service delivery crises, which face us every day here in South Africa, and then when those come together with increased rainfall or flooding, you get a range of impacts. And so the nuances, and this is the first message I'd like to leave with you all, it's a very nuanced set of issues when we come to talk about the SDGs. Although they've been parceled into, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down, it's really the interfaces between those. And I don't really like the word nexus, but it is really about teasing some of those issues out. So what about then the curriculum? We've got these sets of challenges, and from the lens that I'm taking, more of a, if you like, climate change lens, but in particular looking at the biophysical as well as the socioeconomic. And so we're all familiar with these very, I think, brave attempts to try and compartmentalize in some ways the sets of issues that people have agreed on, moving from ending poverty all the way through to climate change, to issues around good health and well-being, quality education, etc. So it's kind of not surprising that the world is interconnected when you look at it. The challenges are urgent, as some of them I've shown you, and complex. But what I want to leave you with is that it's not just science alone, the hardcore sciences, if you like, or the technical knowledge alone that's going to be enough. It's very critical, as we'll hear, I'm sure, from the next speaker, but it's also around these kind of softer, although again, I would say harder issues. The issues of varying perspectives, values, needs, different knowledges, how the epistemology of knowledge is actually constructed and compiled, and then who's actually in the room when these things are being debated, whose agenda is on the table. And these kinds of nuances, I think, are really important, not only for the university hierarchies in which we work to understand, who set the curricula and help shape those, but also for our scholars and our students and our learners, and including myself there. I'm a learner, I'm not just only some kind of pontificating professor. And you can see that the shift has occurred now over time. This is a slide from a colleague of mine who works at this intersectionality as well at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She works also from trying to understand the issues and the trajectories and paths that you take. So you'll see that the debate has started to shift into human well-being, and not only in terms of GDP growth, although that's important, but a much more expanded notion. And you can see there that healthy and productional natural systems, democratic governance, economic progress, equity and posterity have all been put into the circle of sustainable development. And then making up who feeds into those debates and discourses are a number of issues and concerns. But notice in the hub of that is transformational pathways forward. Now that sounds like a very sexy title, but it is actually quite important. So multi-stakeholder processes, investments in resilience, cross-scale coordination, etc. And I'll talk to some of these in a minute. So then the so what question. You know, what does this mean for universities? I've been working in a university for a very, very long time. Sometimes I think perhaps for too long. And there are a number of approaches. And the approach that I want to leave you with is one where I'm going to add to some of the traditional approaches. So many of us who are older in this room or on this call have been taught in this approach, and a very valuable approach, and it's still ongoing, and it's very useful, where you get research funding, you do pure research, you might do a bit of applied research, you might end up doing some development work, and then you apply it. And normally that's done by academics and then interfacing with the key people that you want to influence and impress and get more kind of traction for your work, policy and business. And if you can't do it alone, there's a whole wodge, if you like, of people or groups of people who are the translators or the consultants. So this is the traditional approach that we get measured against at universities as academics, we get trained against as universities, and it's not surprising that that training, that traditional kind of approach, I would argue, ends up kind of mimicking and perpetuating a siloed mentality, which is not wrong. There are some disciplines that need this kind of approach and thrive off this kind of approach. But in the areas where I work, which I would argue are complex, wicked challenges, I don't think this approach alone is going to be sufficient. So what am I looking at? The approach that I'd like to leave you with, and then just show you one case study of how we've tried to do this, is what I would call the transdisciplinary co-learning model. I have to preface what I'm saying is that this is not for everybody, and I have never intended that. So there are the pure chemists or the pure whoever's doing their research, and that's fundamental, and we need that blue kind of sky research. But in the complex wicked challenges, we need this more of an interfaced model where we value other knowledge systems and other paradigms of thinking. And so here you see the knowledge arena from sustainability science, and notice a collective learning process. No one group necessarily holds the stick or the way forward all the time. And so here you actually see where you co-integrate the knowledge. It sounds a bit kumbaya, but I can assure you it does actually help in some ways, and I would argue is a fundamental shift that we need to introduce into the universities. Otherwise, I do think we might go around the silos ad infinitum, and never ever doing sustainable development implementation. So what do I mean? Just very quickly, there's a huge set of literatures on this. I'm not going to go into that. But for those of you who aren't familiar, transdisciplinarity is different to multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. So multidisciplinarity, you might have an EU-funded project, which you then call in to the room, the lawyers, the physicists, the mathematicians, the ecologists, etc. And you all come together and you try and do a combined set of inputs, each coming from your own discipline, where your anchor or your knowledge center keeps its identity very fully. Interdisciplinary is where you bring in people and you start to share across the boundaries, and you actually get some advice and inputs on terms of methodology and approach and theory, and you start mixing. That's interdisciplinary. But notice that transdisciplinarity is much more of a mixed kind of messy picture, because now you're actually going beyond the walls of the university and you're starting to talk to society and other knowledge holders. And in this case, it can get very messy. It can get so blurry that you actually sometimes wonder what you're actually doing. But I would argue that for the complex wicked challenges that we're dealing with, this is one of the ways that we have to go forward. So in the words of a colleague of mine who's also working on this, UCT is working on it, Rhodes University are doing incredibly excellent work, and ourselves at GCI at Wits University, transdisciplinarity is really engaged scholarship that provides an integrative way to collaborate and acknowledge different knowledge systems, and in particular to marginalized voices. So this is not only the poor, but often the underserved disciplines in our university that get pushed to the edge. For example, perhaps with AI dominating in some universities, some of the issues get pushed to the edge, for example, perhaps in some of the humanities. So how do we actually make sense of all of this and bring it into the curriculum, etc.? So just to summarize, what transdisciplinarity requires is a joint problem framing. Here you see a slide from another colleague of mine who's doing excellent work at the University of Stellenbosch, John van Breda, and you'll see that transdisciplinarity is trying to look at the interface between science and society. So you acknowledge and you hold firm on the scientific discourses, research, theoretical and methodological innovations. You don't drop that, but you acknowledge that science is contested. It's not always unidirectional with one-size-fits-all solutions. In terms of societal practice, you've then got society, as I showed you with some of my opening slides, that are dealing with climate change, but they're also dealing with service delivery and other challenges. So how do those everyday life issues interface and start to and can begin to inform the kind of science that we should be doing? And that's where I think we should be moving in terms of how do we look at curricula for sustainable development, goal achievement, which is, I believe, the focus of today's webinar. So just by way of example, very quickly, because I don't want to take our time from question period, but here's an example of work that we did in the city of Johannesburg. We started off by working with various departments. They were trying to write a climate action plan, facilitated also by C40 and others. And we interfaced with a number of people from different departments. We used what is called an expansive learning approach, built on the work of Vygotsky and others. So our work going into this was informed by our own scientific theory. It wasn't a kind of neutral blank space, but we went in with a much more open, engaged space, which I think is important. And here you can see one of the gentlemen. We normally used to go into these groups and give them climate model after climate model, which paralyzed many of the people in the room mentally, because you just can't imagine, and what do you do when you see the world heating up, etc., etc. Whereas this approach asks you to start in a situated context with the matters of concern that a particular group is facing. In this case, it was the city of Johannesburg. And here they're putting up what really matters every day to them, including how they get paid, how they get rewarded, what kind of management systems they're on, etc. And then from there, we spun out the work to look at how can we bring climate change into the work of the city of Johannesburg, but co-producing anything that we're going to do with the university and the city together, including with its citizens. And I really strongly believe that in this field of research, complex, wicked environmental challenges, unless we adopt this as one of the approaches, we're not going to get sustainable development goals achieved in any short period of time. Here you can see some of the work we were doing, quite hilarious in some places, as you can see with the group. We're working with the ministry, the Department of Health, and trying to work on heat health plans, etc. So we worked in very engaged ways, and that work is still ongoing. And it's taken about 5 years to get some tangible output. So that's the one tension that you have when you try and work in these spaces. You need time, and it takes trust building. So we did a lot of work with the city. We tried to show back to them what they've been doing and the tensions and the dissonances that exist in the city. And I won't go into detail. You can read papers on this if you would like later on. But one of the highlights of the work that I've been doing in this space, and I think it speaks directly to education curricula, not only at the university, but also across other spaces, including in the corporate space, but also at schools and other centers of learning, and that is with the youth. So we were very fortunate to work with the South African Institute of International Affairs, based at WITS, but having a reach much, much wider. And we worked with youth from the age groups of about 15 up to 30. And here you can see many of us meeting at one of their gatherings. And because of the work of the city that we had done as a university, and because of the work with the youth, we enabled and brokered a chance for the youth to actually write into the climate change policy of Johannesburg their own voice. So their own voice was taken right up and put into the actual document, into the policy. So a very good example of transdisciplinarity. Right, moving along, just to show what I've been trying to say, and I'm not going to go through all of these because I am mindful of time, but I think we do have business as usual teaching, which is important. Subject is the key knowledge. It's usually one way, it's top down, it's classroom and power dominated, it's normally knowledge mode is subject knowledge. and the knowledge is seen to be outside often of the learner space. But the knowledge process that we are trying to follow is to do it in much more of a transdisciplinary space. So acknowledging prior learning that comes into the room, acknowledging knowledge exchanges, safe spaces in the classrooms, and then the mode 2 knowledge where you're actually working with practitioners in the space. Sorry, there is someone whose mic is on and it's interfering a little bit. If I could ask them possibly just to switch that off. So what that requires then in terms of transdisciplinarity is a different approach. It's really trying to get that notion of action spaces into the room and into the curricula. And it also requires that you're not only teaching hardcore skills, which are critical, undeniably, but also issues around open communication, negotiation, empathy, critical and creative thinking, time management, problem solving, etc., which often are not on the table as such in universities. You're expected to kind of absorb this. And then when you get into the business world or into other spaces, this kind of doesn't come out until you put into places of leadership where you might find yourself lacking in those skills. So as I conclude, what I'm suggesting in terms of trying to reach the Sustainable Development Goals is, yes, we need very good science that needs to be anchored by really good skills development, excellence in science, advances that are acknowledged, and in particular an African lens so that we don't fall foul of dealing with our own problems, which I would argue in some cases are very unique to perhaps an African context. But we also need this transformation in institutional cultures, research and teaching. And I would argue, unfortunately, in many universities currently, transdisciplinarity is not seen and respected as the kind of approach that we need in universities. So we pay lip service to SDG achievement. We have a lot of, blah, 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 as Greta Thunberg would say, but we don't change and look at the way we are rewarding academics who take this route, because it's very hard to do this kind of double-legged approach where you're very strong in your own discipline of training, but you also have this eye on doing this other kind of approach where you integrate and work with others. And so unless the institutional culture, both in the reward system, the National Research Foundations, the actual funders who are starting to shift into the space, take that kind of approach and enable that space to occur in research and teaching and administration, I think we're going to have a long way to go to reach the goal of the SDGs. So I would argue that the landscape of TD research is a rocky terrain currently, particular for supervisors and for students and for learners. And it's only the brave that I think, or the insane perhaps, who wander into the space. So where to next? I started right in the beginning showing that there's a well-being approach now to sustainable development, and I would argue that this approach is now starting to get entrenched. And it sounds a bit kumbaya, but really linking the heart and the mind, the software knowledge, which is social, the hardware, which is technical, and then the hardware, where you pay attention to local and tacit knowledge. I think that's being ignored, and I think it needs to come into the play much, much more strongly, not in the form of psychology in universities, but in a much, much wider, almost, if you like, in a mental presencing space that I think is important. So there are just some of the examples of that, the technological solutions, which are important, IT, but also the internal motivations, the hardware approach, how do you get collective action going, and then the software approach, the policies, the arts, etc. So to conclude, the creation of this open space, this fecund space, culture, art, religions, and spiritualities, I think fits in nicely to other curricula that we already have in universities, political, social, and historical sciences, environmental, and other sciences, but introducing this transdisciplinary space, I think, is very important. And so here's an example of an artist that I'm very fortunate to be working with. She's a famous artist. Here's an eco seat that she's been building with the city of Johannesburg. It serves two purposes, and it's a very nice example of SDG into action, because it's not only a seat where everyone can come and sit and rest under the trees, etc., but it's actually part of an internal sewage and stormwater drainage system. So it has a functional element, but also an artistic element, and also is able to be then used with communities in that area and designing various activities that we're starting to work with people in Lorenzville with this artist in Johannesburg, but coming from an artistic lens, not necessarily a technocratic lens. And so what that means is that the personal, the political, and the practical are all threaded together in this much more systemic and structural approach, which I think is missing currently in the university. Unfortunately, if you want to do this kind of science, you have to go into a silo for a while, and then only at a postgraduate level, if you're crazy enough, are you able to go and take options that will get you into this kind of space. And so what that then means is that we need to be now really rethinking the university curricula from the practical, using a systems approach, all the way to how knowledge feeds into the system in the university and backwards and outwards into society. And
Sorry,
then
Coleen.
also,
Sorry,
yes,
Coleen, 5 minutes to go.
Yes, I'm nearly done. Okay. And then lastly, transcending these very powerful paradigms, which I think are entrenched in universities, and we need to be fighting hard to look at. So my last slide on the button, thank you, is that the world is interconnected. I've tried to show you that with the example from Johannesburg. The challenges, in particular in global change science, are urgent and complex. And the time for action is now. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. So we can wander around, you know, like those books that you see, Where is Wally, in this SDG morass here, perhaps. But I think we've got a lot that we can actually share in our curricula, but we need everyone on board, including the hierarchies in the university, the funding agencies, and the reward systems. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Coleen, for that insightful presentations. I can see comments coming in already, and I'm sure we have some exciting questions to talk about later on. Once again, thank you very much. The next speaker today is Professor Vassilios Makrakis. Sorry if I didn't pronounce your name very well. Professor Vassilios is a professor. Vassilios is a professor of ICT and Education for Sustainable Development in the School of Education and Social Sciences at Frederick University, Cyprus, and UNESCO Chair, ICTs in Education for Sustainable Development at the University of Crete in Greece, as well as the Director of the Regional Center of Expertise for Sustainable Development, which is acknowledged by the United Nations University. Professor Makrakis has graduated from the University of Athens in Greece and Concordia University in Canada. He received his PhD from the University of Stockholm, Sweden, and in the past has worked at various universities and research centers. He has published several books and more than 200 scholarly articles, which are published in collective volumes, international journals, and conference proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to welcome Professor Makrakis to share with us his presentation. Professor, you've got 25 minutes. Thank you. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gladman, for the introduction. And I also thank very much all the committee for organizing this very important webinar. And as a project leader of the PUAT project, I also thank very much Coleen for this very interesting presentation. So my topic is problem-based learning methodology to address SDGs. What is problem-based learning? Just in a few words, it's an instructional method which focuses on the investigation and resolution of real-world problems. And as you know, the SDGs focus on real-world problems, on issues that our societies face for many, many years. So, this is a context for students to learn many transversal skills, like the ones included in the 10 critical skills framework that have been advanced by me and my colleague. And this 10 Cs model is an extension of the 4 Cs model.
Sorry to interrupt. Your slides aren't on full slideshow. I wondered if you could put those on, because I think we're missing some of the very nice slides. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Is okay now?
No, it's still on individual. So we just need to get the slideshow view, the view slide.
It is. I mean, I have done that, you know.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's just for me. I don't know if others are having that problem as well.
Is okay now?
Yeah, you need to get, Vassilios, you need to get rid of the list of individual slides on the left-hand side of the screen. So you're not getting the full screen, which is the slide view.
It is, for me, it's a full screen.
Oh, okay.
Okay, right.
Yes, but I cannot do because, you know, it's a matter of, you know,
Okay,
it's
go
okay.
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So I talked before about the 10Cs model, which is an extension of the 4Cs model. And the skills we have added is co-responsibility, which is a very important skill beyond mere responsibility, cross intercultural competence, critical reflection, critical consciousness, connectivity, and networking. And
excuse me, Vassilios, sorry, can I interrupt? I don't think your slides seem to be stuck. You're still on your first slide. Okay, now there's some, okay, thank you.
it's okay now?
Yes, thank
Hello?
you.
Yeah, your
We're,
slides,
we're seeing the third
Yes.
slide.
Yeah.
Yes, it's okay.
It is okay now?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
I minimize it because it's okay now. Do you see now the 10Cs
Yes.
model?
Yes.
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 So I said before, the 10Cs model is an extension of the 4Cs model. And the skills we have added are very important in the context of transformative learning approach to infuse SDGs in curricula, whatever is university or school. Another issue is that problem-based learning has to be connected with meaningful learning. So meaningful learning is based on authentic, curriculum-based and interdisciplinary approaches. I stick on interdisciplinary approaches because in our curricula, whatever it's, you know, university or schools, because of the philosophical approach of is not so easy to integrate or to work with transdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary approaches, because as you know, our curricula are structured or study program structured on vertical approaches rather than horizontal approaches. So it's very difficult, as Coleen also said, to apply cross or transdisciplinarity under this kind of curriculum structures. This is a model developed on meaningful learning, and here it is also a reflection of the 10Cs model: reflective, active, experiential, communicative, transformative, collaborative, dialogical, ethical, political, authentic, problem posing. All these are very important principles when we want to talk about meaningful learning approaches. The theories underlying problem-based learning can be based on experiential learning theory that originated in Cole's learning styles and experiential learning cycle of 4 stages, and the constructivistic learning theory, and also the transformative learning theory. So these three philosophical approaches are very important when we talk about problem-based learning, especially from a transformative perspective. All these can be merged into the Xcontract learning paradigm, which tries to merge the experiential, the constructivistic, and the transformative learning perspective. So we need to unify all this. Of course, all these three theories are similar in many ways, but of course, one supplements the other, and it's very important to see them from a holistic perspective. Now, mainstreaming SDGs in the university curricula enabled by problem-based learning. As you know, we try through the PUAT project to develop or to professionalize academic skills in multiple academic disciplines. And this is one way, a very important way, I would say, in order to infuse sustainability into the study programs. And here, contextualization is a very key concept. How to contextualize SDGs with problem-based learning. This is very important because we can use SDGs in order to advance problem-based learning skills. At the same time, we can use problem-based learning to advance SDGs. So when, for example, considering the historical South African social realities and the contextual challenges of SDGs, like lack of clean drinking water, poverty, hunger, food and food insecurity, environmental and social unsafety, economic disparities. All these can be, promoted through the engagement in problem-based learning, because through it, learners have more opportunities to become critically conscious on these realities, and at the same time develop multiple opportunities for deeper inner reflection to reevaluate and their frame of reference with regard to what they are and what they could become, and as well as to play a role as agents of change. We have developed transformative problem-based learning methodology, which has been used widely with our students in our universities, both the University of Crete and the University in Cyprus, but also in many universities globally. So the emphasis on this methodology is on transformational change. Is driven by an emancipatory, critical transformative perspective on human interests, as contrasted to technical, which is rooted on positivism, and practical, on constructivism, according to Habermas typology. It also gives due emphasis on the 10Cs model, but also the 6 pillars of 21st century learning pillars, and probably know these ones, like learning to be, learning to know, learning to live together sustainably, I would say, and learning to do, and also learning to transform oneself and society. And to these 5, we have also added a 5th pillar, which is learning to give and share. And of course, the meaningful learning model. So these are the foundations for developing this transformative problem-based learning I will show you in a while. So the roles of instructor and student in this model is instructor roles is facilitator, coach, motivator, co-learner. The student role is active, civic engaged, critical, and investigator. So this model, which is depicted here, has certain key processes like raising the problem, brainstorming, developing claims, propositions, linking claims to evidence, arguing on evidence-based problem solutions, and acting on proposing solutions. And scaffolding and reflecting are also very important, in these processes. So, as you might now see that the previous, models I have described briefly are very much, connected to this kind of structure. And in order to facilitate further this structure, we have an organizer here, which is more concrete. And this has been used by our students and teachers as well in order to develop the arguments around any of sustainability issue elicited from the 17 SDGs. The problem, and of course here, in order to handle this process, we ask our students to focus on three key questions, brainstorming on these questions, develop concept map of what they know at the beginning in order to also see the changes which will take place during this process, and then go for formulating claims, try to investigate and find supporting evidence for the claims they formulate, and then to find at least 3 reasons and facts, more than 3 facts according to the one reason they have formulated. And then they start the argumentation, which is, I would say, the core of the whole process. And during this argumentation, they also try to formulate warrants for the reasons, and finally to develop possible solutions. And from these possible solutions, they have to identify the ones that they can act and in order to produce a change, not only a change for themselves, and a change for the society that the problem they deal with, is faced. So in a way, I mean, we try to apply the learning to transform oneself and society through this process. And we also give to our students like a model concept map in order to start working on it from the very beginning. So since for us, we are very much interested to see the changes happening to those who work with this model, they produce several, I would say, concept maps during this process. And through this, we can also measure what changes happen on the individual level, because we are very much interested to find out what happens and what skills they acquire during this process, and how these skills can be translated into praxis. I have also to mention here that we use 3 types of claims, which we find very interesting. And so whatever it's the subject, whatever it is, climate change as a focus for dealing, as a topic, or whatever is, like smoking, which is can be considered within the SDG 3, human health and well-being. We have identified 4 key claims which we see very important in this process: factual, cause and effect, value-laden, and policy claims. I would say that through this model and the experiences we have gained through hundreds of students, we have found that it makes learning relevant to the real world, and SDGs here provide us, a resource for that. It also makes an impact on bridging the awareness, knowledge, values, action gaps. We have put very much, emphasis on the knowledge, attitudes, and values. And of course, if we see reality, there is a gap that we rarely move or shift from the sentiments, from the knowledge to real action. So, I mean, merging the three H's, the head, cognition, the heart, the sentiment, and the hand, the action, I think is very important. And problem-based learning through a transformative perspective open us or unlock us to make a progress towards these gaps. So we have also learned that it makes learning personal because students are more engaged, interested, and energetic, active learners as they deal with issues elicited from the SDGs, especially if these issues are within their own local environment. It also promotes an interdisciplinary approach to teaching and learning through the lens of SDGs. As I said before, we stick on interdisciplinarity because if we want to shift from interdisciplinarity to cross-disciplinarity or transdisciplinarity, then we have to make many changes in our structure, in the way we develop our study programs, our curricula from all the educational levels, I would say. We have also learned that through it promotes collaborative and transformative learning that drives SDGs from knowledge through learning to transform oneself and society. And since we have been working with this model on paper and pencil, now we started to digitize, to develop a web-based application. And through it, we aspire that it will facilitate better our students, especially from a collaborative approach. So I give you some references because all these concepts are very tight, and it's sometimes not so easy to explore, especially with very limited time. So that's all for the moment. If you have any questions, I thank you very much for your attention. And I hope that this webinar and will be very useful to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Makrakis. This was a very insightful presentation. So once again, I just want to thank our presenters for these two wonderful presentations, Coleen and Professor Makrakis. And I would like us to just open the floor for questions and answers, recognizing that these discussions could go on beyond the time that we have today, and people can continue with the conversations in the various spaces. So my co-hosts are going to help me in identifying anyone with a question in the floor. And maybe just to get started, this is a question posed to both Professor Vogel and Makrakis. So in what ways can this endeavor be meshed with the transformation debates that are ongoing in the country? Often when it comes to new ideas to change, academics or some academics, they're really not happy to try new things. They think that, wow, we have an agenda already that has not been completed, and then there's this new idea that is coming to the fore. So my question is, in what ways can this infusion of SDGs into our university curricula be, in line with the current transformation debates in South Africa and beyond? Thank you.
Would you like us to? Okay, go for it. Sorry, go for it.
Coleen is more expert to answer it because of you. I will try also, but please, Coleen, I mean, you can start.
So, I mean, I think that's a fundamental question, right? And that's why I'm suggesting a more transdisciplinary approach, because I think what we're missing in the university spaces are the safe spaces for the dialogue that we're needing, those critical dialogues. Because at the moment, what tends to happen is we pit it against each other. So students on the one hand, and some academics versus other academics with different persuasions, etc. And so I think that's what the transdisciplinary notion is arguing for. So it's not only that you mix up knowledge from skills and learning and all subject bases, but it also allows these dialogical spaces, which I think are very critical. I mean, this is a huge question, and I could talk much, much, much more deeply around all other elements. But for now, I would say we could find out quite a lot from what Prof. Makrakis is also suggesting. I think if you look at what he was suggesting and what I was suggesting, interestingly enough, we both spoke about hardware, software, etc. We're not going to solve these problems just thinking up here. We have to really start thinking more as human beings in these spaces. And I think these are kinds of approaches can really help us go a long way. But there are other entities and examples all around the country that have been trying to do this. But I think it's as soon as we start shutting down the openness of the co-learning, co-approaches, being human, that we end up fighting, and we're not going to get very far, I don't think. Thanks.
Thank you, Coleen, for that response. Prof. Makrakis?
Yes, thank you very much. I think Coleen said everything. I think that everything is with our own habits of mind. Whatever it is, personal theories, beliefs, stereotypes, everything is within us. So I think we have to make the break. We have to make the revolution ourselves to break, these stereotypes, these personal theories, and in order to approach, everything from a different perspective, whatever it is, teaching, learning, or curricula. I think that nowadays, the way that our universities are structured, don't help very much, So there is a revolution, I would say. But first of all, we have to change. I much believe to personal change, and reflection, critical reflection is very important. And at the same time, change you will have from the bottom up, not from the up down, in order to shake the system, to be it more, flexible, and then we can find ways to see knowledge and action from a horizontal, not from a vertical approach that nowadays you see is the practice. So I think that's why the PUAT project focuses on the professionalization of the academic skills, because through it we can open ways to reach better ways of approaching learning, teaching, and knowledge. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. That's profound. I think there's need for a fundamental shift in the way we do things, the way we think, including our own values as people who are leading in these spaces. Just gonna get 2 questions. I see that conversations are going on, so if you have a question, you can post it here. So A question from Martin: to what extent does senior leadership at higher education institutions need to buy in and drive these concepts and initiatives?
So, I mean, if I can start off, maybe, I mean, I think that's fundamental. Unless you have champions at the highest levels, you're going to beat your head constantly bashing, because they won't, you know, there'll be seen to be no value add. It'll be seen to be some kind of esoteric, kind of cutesy stuff that you do. It's not science, it's cute. And I don't think that's true. But I think, to be fair to the hierarchies of the universities, there's now pressures coming from all sides, right? Including the students demanding change as well. And so I don't think any executive manager in the university can sleep well at night unless they really start to think hard about these debates. And so I don't think we're changing as fast as we could, but I think we really are starting to see some willingness to go down that road. But unfortunately, I've spent much of my academic career trying to do what Prof. Makrakis is also saying, trying to do this kind of more expansive learning types of approaches for transformation. And it's not an easy path. And I think now we've got to really move up the gears. It's not going to be for everyone. You're not going to take everyone along with you, and that's fine. But we do really need to, so the universities where these changes have occurred, like ASU, Arizona State University, there have been champions right at the highest levels who bought into it. And obviously not dropping the other kinds of approaches, but really pushing. And so I think we haven't got many African examples, I don't think. And so it would be a wonderful example for some of our collective universities through Arua or whatever it is to come together collectively and start pushing. But we're starting to talk amongst ourselves in the universities. Thanks.
Thanks, Coleen.
Yes. Yeah, I think I agree with Coleen, and we have to raise voices. And Coleen, I mean, mentioned this multi-stakeholder perspective. I think we have to see the issue of hierarchies also in the context of the other stakeholders within university and society at the same time, because the university is not, something which is outside from the social environment, and it's not something which is is functioning by itself. So we have to approach what happens in our institutions from a multi-level and let's say interest groups, and in order to bring society to university and the university to society. So, I mean, we have to work towards it, and don't expect, I mean, that the current hierarchies within our, institutions or in society will help much to advance SDGs unless, find more democratic, I would say, processes through these, many interested groups, which all concern with, the issue of building a more sustainable and just society, I would say. Thank you.
And thank you very much. I think that's very important points being raised here. For example, having champions within universities at the highest level to push this agenda, but also raising voices. I think that's one aspect that's very important as well. And also getting the views of multiple stakeholders in a very democratic way that might actually highlight the value of these processes. Thank you very much. Before I get to Pile, I think we've got some interesting comments here in the chat box. True, we need huge cultural shifts, but all to create systemic changes required. One user says at undergraduate graduate level, I'm challenged to get the students to a point where they're expert enough in the subject to engage at this level and to then introduce these approaches all in one academic year. My conclusion has been that one must infuse these concepts a golden thread through the course. simulated authentic learning is as far as I've gotten in the undergraduate sphere before class sizes, and the curriculum has stumped me. Wow. And then Ismail says, I think problem-based learning is difficult to attain among students who are based to teacher-centered approach. Therefore, I prefer to go for a milder approach, which is guided problem-based learning. Thank you for those comments. And I think we are speaking the same language here, and there's need to engage further. Pillay, Bala Pillay, may you please go ahead?
Thank you, Gladman. Yeah, thanks to the speakers. I think they were very exciting talks, and I think we're all being very, very, politically correct in the way we are responding to the challenges. But the reality is, yes, the university structures, the policies, and things that come on board like the pandemic and a whole lot of issues, including the executive, including their priorities, including the financial challenges, is not going to lend itself to a transformative approach. There are too many roadblocks, there are too many impediments in a typical South African university, in the structures, the actual departments or schools or whatever we want to call them, the way we've been taught, the academics themselves, they really need to be changed in order to make changes that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So all in all, I think we got to accept that's a reality. However, I think one needs to be optimistic, one needs to be positive and keep working at it. And I must say that, having been at the university for many, many years than most of you, I can see the academic voice has been silenced in many ways. You don't get that real, enthusiasm, the, curiosity, the academic that wants to make changes. I mean, that's what you're an academic for.
Absolutely.
Question all the time. And we had many examples where such people, once your head sticks up above a certain level, it gets chopped off. But having said all of that, I think, we must soldier on, we must move on. We keep talking about this. We've spoken about it for many years. And when you look at the gains that you've made and the people's willingness to want to change, it's really moving at a snail's pace, unfortunately. So, there are champions like Coleen and Vassilios and other people perhaps in the audience. And I think we must just hold hands together and move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those reflections. I think you speak to our hearts there, that there is a tendency to silence the voices that we need in these spaces. And I think we have to be optimistic, in making sure that we are heard, of course, in a very constructive way. Coleen, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I wholeheartedly agree. And I think some of the work that is done at Rhodes University, for example, by Hela Lotsasitka, where they're pushing for a more transgressive learning approach. So I think you're right. We shouldn't shy away from being transgressive and shaking the tree, but we need to do that quite, I wouldn't say subversively, it's the wrong word, strategically, so that, like the question that's Ishmael is putting, we're not saying abandon the curriculum and all hug each other. That's not at all. In fact, I think the edge we've lost in South Africa is that many, many years ago, we were really focused on that transgressive shift. And now it's kind of, we're backpedaling a little bit. And obviously COVID hasn't made it very, very easy, but I think the deliberate kind of focused intention where you can make the curriculum structured, but it's structured in slightly different ways. And in fact, in some cases, very different ways. But you've got to be careful. You've got to mix and match. You don't just go and tip it all out, because then you won't get anywhere at all in a university. So it's kind of quite a strategic process that I think you have to play. But I really do agree with Bala Pillay that it's a hard battle, and we just got to, those of us who we've got to keep moving on many fronts, not only in our university, but also at the NRFs, the National Research Foundations, the ASAFs, all over. You know, we've got to hunt in packs, I think.
Thank you very much. This is quite exciting and insightful to me, and I hope to everyone. So I'm going to read some comments here. I've found that the students get very stressed and confused the moment you change the playbook. I think this was a comment to an earlier comment, or rather a response to an earlier comment that says, I think problem-based learning is difficult to attain among students who are used to teacher-centered approach. Therefore, I prefer to go for a milder approach, which is guided problem-based learning. Belinda says CPUT, Urban Planning Department, and UWC Information Systems have been working on a 3-year project to engage with SDGs, specifically SDG 11 in local marginalized communities, and collaboratively developing social digital innovations. This year, we are including the NGO voice. Well done, Belinda. Oh yeah, I see a comment from Martin that says, awesome. All right. Hello, I'm from the University of Technology, Malaysia. I learned a lot from Prof. Makrakis for being in his project for the last 3 years. I'm very privileged to be in his SDG project. Thank you, Zaleha Ismail. Any other comments for further discussions? Even sharing experiences from our different spaces? So I want, okay,
maybe
sorry.
Maybe I'll just,
sorry.
Sorry, maybe I'll just come in. It would be interesting to hear from others on this call, but the students that I engage with actually want this kind of, they demand this kind of stuff. And when I say stuff, I mean it loose. The students, and I would love to hear from Prof. Makrakis and others who've engaged in these kinds of approaches, whether it's inter or trans, whatever, but more of a shared curriculum and really with a purpose to transforming both ourselves and our societies that we engage in. But I found that the demand for the courses is quite high. It's growing. Students are wanting these kind of courses. It's not like you have to force them to enroll. They see the course, they read a little bit, and they are attracted to these courses. Maybe because they're looking for jobs, I would presume that's a strong driver, but also their everyday realities are starting to maybe resonate. So it's not for lack. I think we've got a window of opportunity now that we should really now take forward, rather than soft pedaling as we can end up doing when, as someone mentioned, if you push too strongly in the university, you could get chopped down. But maybe now we've got to keep nudging, pushing. But the students are, I think, those who've done some of my courses, and I'm sure others, I'd be interested to hear, normally enjoy these courses, and they're engaged and they want to do these courses, whether they're undergraduates or postgraduates. Thanks.
Thank you, Coleen. Prof. Makrakis, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I think also we have to take into consideration the COVID, experiences, and how these experiences will have an impact on the way we approach knowledge and the delivery and dealing with knowledge. So I think many things will change, and if we, still think over the way we were working 3 years ago or 2 years ago, it will be quite different in the near future, because nowadays we have used to have many challenges in society, many professions like the digital nomads. We know that hundreds of thousands of people now are the so-called digital nomads who work in various have various kind of works in all levels. And of course universities and schools should also take into consideration all these changes. At the same time, we have also to see how to get technology from an emancipatory perspective, not just as a delivery medium, but from an emancipatory perspective, which will unlock potentialities and actualities, both for staff and students at the same time. So we are faced with many challenges, and I think that this is a good sign now. It's good for society, good for universities to deal with and move forward.
Thank you very much for that response. There was a hand up by a device called user. Is the hand still up or it has disappeared?
Sorry, yes, I don't know why it's calling me user.
Okay.
My name is Coleen. I'm from the University of Cape Town. It just occurred to me that there are many people, I think there's almost a momentum building. People are just not aware of one another. So there's people doing amazing work at universities just a stone's throw away. And it would actually be lovely to have a kind of a hub or some think tank where academics who are like-minded and passionate about this can share ideas and sort of encourage one another. And also collaborate, because we're all working in little silos. So I know I've been in a little silo, and this has been incredibly inspiring. Thank you, both Professor Makrakis and Professor Vogel.
Thank you very much for that contribution. I think it's a paradox, isn't it, that we're trying to push for collaboration, but meanwhile we're working in our own spaces. We don't even know each other. I think it's a wonderful suggestion. Yeah. Any further reflections on that? Okay, I'm just going to read a comment here. Definitely agree with Dr. Vogel. The students are very passionate about the interdisciplinary and sustainable themes, and it has been difficult to connect the students and staff. Is it Liana? Do you want to reflect on that? Why has it been difficult to connect students and staff? If I may?
Yes, hi. Yes, I think I hope you guys can hear me all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. Now I think so yes, I'm from INSCAPE, which is a private institution in South Africa. And I think the problem that we just have is that because the students are so very passionate about it, there isn't really it seems like an accessible platform for them to speak to other institutions, maybe to other people that are really knowledgeable in certain areas that they're interested in, and just maybe finding something there. I mean, obviously, except for our Green Building Council, which is quite formal and not necessarily something that we can, I mean, it's very, very built environments specific, if I can put it that way. But I do think it would be something that we could maybe work on, opening up the discussion areas to connect people. I think like the lady from Cape Town also said.
Thank you very much. Any other comments, reflections, questions? I suppose if you're working in this space, the word reflection should be a key word. Coleen?
I don't know, maybe, is there a way for the organizers or somehow that we can take some of these ideas forward? Because, you know, it's always a tragedy. We all get inspired by these webinars, and maybe even connecting with the work that Prof. Makrakis is doing. Is there some way we could set up with virtual processes, I don't know, once every 2 months, some kind of begin small and see what happens? I know I've got colleagues who I think would be interested. I don't want to put up my hand and say, I'll do it. It's too much work, but I'd be happy to play in the patch. So, I mean, it's just a pity you have these wonderful webinars and then we all get inspired and then we get sucked back into our business as usual kind of stuff.
Thanks, Coleen. Maybe I can leave the time to Anthea and Mfundo. Do you want to respond to that? Okay, Rita is responding.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks, Coleen. What I did put in is that one of the project teams in HELTASA works with program development across the sector, and that would involve curricula as well. And I think this could be the project as a start to take this forward, but it could fit into most of our other projects as well. So we could start here and then you know, you could seek the collaboration across those other projects that involves student learning and professional learning, even the decolonization project team can get involved. So we can make a start with this and take it forward from there.
Thank you, Rita. Prof. Makrakis?
Yes,
Yeah,
we have the PUAT project, and through HELTASA, we can organize more webinars and follow up, and also to share knowledge and skills through these, works we do. So I hope that, during the next months, we'll have the opportunity to meet again and also to expand our thinking from works that are contextualized in our partner universities, and Rhodes University, KwaZulu-Natal University, and Venta University. And also, I hope that HELTASA, who is our partner in the PUAT project, will play a very, active role to bring all these, inputs from outside the project. And I think this is very important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think there's a communication from Anthea Adams. Yes, please connect with us. Program Development Scholarly Team, aadams@ru.ac.za. So you can take this email, and if you've got any questions, you can send them to this email and they will respond promptly. Any other question? We've got about 10 minutes to go before we conclude. All right, if there are no further questions, okay, yes, okay, it's a hand. Okay, thank you, Liana. If there are no further questions, I would like to once again thank Professor Coleen Vogel and Professor Makrakis for sharing your insights on this issue of infusion of SDGs in our curricula. We all agree that it's very important, it's timely, it's topical, but also importantly giving us insights in thinking about this topic and how we could actually do it in practice. So thank you very much for this presentation. And to the audience, I want to thank you for making time and for contributing to this discussion. I hope that as we leave this place, we're going to have further debates and discussions going into our own spaces, that we should break the barriers, we should break the barriers. That is the agreement today. We should collaborate and share these insights for us to have a collective voice. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.